Hello students, this is Miss Dalton and this is Notes 3-3, which is factoring four-term polynomials. Our objective is we're going to factor four-term polynomials using the box method. So let's look at some examples. Hopefully this is review to you. You may or may not have learned this using the box method, so we're going to just review it today. Alright, so for our first example we have x to the third plus x squared plus 2x plus 2. And we notice that there are four terms, and so we have this box that has four different sections. So we're going to put each of the terms in its own box. So we've got the x to the third that's going to go in this first box, and then we have x squared that goes in the second box, and then in this box down here 2x, and then in the fourth box we just have a plus 2. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to, if you remember we used prime factorization to do the greatest common factor. What you're doing is you're taking out the greatest common factor of the columns and the rows. So for this first one, I'm going to go ahead and write down what the prime factorization is. For x to the third, we have x times x times x. That's what x to the third is. And then x squared is just going to be x times x. 2x is just 2 times x. And then 2 is just 2, and we can say it's times 1 as well. Alright, so what you're going to do is you're going to factor out in the column. So in this first column, I've got x to the third and I have 2x. Well, they have an x in common in each one of them, so I'm going to factor that out to this column, the first column. In my second column, the first thing you're going to look at is what is the sign of this first term. Well, this sign right here is a plus, so it's going to factor out as a plus. And then you look for anything in common. Well, these don't have anything in common. They don't have any x's in common, and the 2's not in common. But what they do have in common is that x times x, we could write that that is times 1. So anytime you don't have something in common, just remember that they always could be multiplied by 1, so the common factor is 1. Now let's look at the rows. So in the rows, I have, in this top row, I have 1x that's in common, and then I have another x that I have in common. So what is the greatest common factor? The greatest common factor is x times x, which is x squared. In the bottom row, the sign that I'm going to factor out is a plus, because that first term is positive, so I'm factoring that out. And then what they have in common is a 2, so I'm going to factor out that 2. Alright, so the numbers that end up on the outside of the box, those are your factors. And so we're going to write those down. X squared plus 2 times x plus 1. Okay, and I want to point out that, remember when we were multiplying, we had the multiples go on the outside of the box, or the two things that we were multiplying went on the outside of the box, and then we multiplied in. Well, when we're factoring, we're going to start by putting it on the inside, and we're going to divide out. So that is how we're using the box method to factor. And if you remember, multiplication is commutative, so it doesn't matter which one of these binomials you put first. It's commutative, so it doesn't matter which order you put them in. Alright, let's move on to example number 2. The first thing you're going to do in example 2 is you want to put them in the box in descending order. So it's not in descending order right now, so the very first thing that would, or the first term that would come first in descending order is 15x to the third, and that's going to go in my first box. The next box is going to have the minus 6x squared, because that's what would come next in descending order, and then the plus 20x is going to come here. Okay, and then last is the minus 8, and that goes here. Okay, now I'm not going to go ahead and show you the prime factorization, but if you wanted to go ahead and do that, you could. I'm just going to go ahead and start factoring out the GCF. In this first column, I have 15x to the third plus 20x. They have a 5 in common that could get factored out, And then the x to the third and the x, the biggest one that I could factor out is just 1x. In the second column, notice that you have a minus here, so that's going to come out when you factor it. And then the 6 and the 8, once you factored out that sign, you don't have to worry about the signs anymore. And so now you have 6 and 8, and the GCF of 6 and 8 is 2. Now there's not an x in my with the negative 8, and so I can't factor out an x, so let's move on to the rows. 15x to the third minus 6x squared, they have a 3 that you could factor out. And then x squared and x to the third, the greatest common factor is x squared. Okay, in the bottom row, the 20x minus 8, I'm going to go ahead and take out that positive, so it's going to be a plus out here. 20 and 8 has a GCF of 4, and again, I don't have an x in common in both of them, so that's all I could factor out. So write down what your factors are. 3x squared plus 4 times 5x minus 2. Okay? Again, it does not matter which binomial you write first because the multiplication is commutative. And what you could do to check your answer is you could go ahead and multiply these back together to make sure that you end up with what you started with. All right, so that's about it. And just make sure you fill out your WISC, and we will see you in class tomorrow.